Every day, we take a risk that we don't even consider when walking out the door each morning. However, many people in the world today do not have this luxury. Around the world, men, women, and children suffer from illnesses that are not seen in the United States anymore.
With only 300 health workers trained to administer life-saving vaccinations, protecting children from easily transmitted infections like measles is a big challenge.
What happened? Why are we able to live in a society that does not have to worry about a plethora of deadly diseases? And why are some people calling for an end to a procedure that has been touted as a miracle since the 1960s?
India has the highest number of newborn deaths in the world. More than 4 lakh children die within the first 24 hours of life due to diseases that are preventable.
In 1948, the week of September 18th recorded its highest polio incidence with 1,839 cases. This is 1949's war against infantile paralysis as seen in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Before vaccinations for diseases such as polio, smallpox, and measles became a reality in the mid-1900s, many diseases were difficult to treat once contracted, and many suffered greatly. However, following the introduction of these vaccines, the number of cases of these diseases drastically fell. So how do these vaccines work?
When you give a vaccine to an individual, the vaccine actually will have a part of the virus that sting, or you can say it is attenuated, or it's in a form that your body just kind of recognizes that and makes an immunity builds an immunity.
The body at that point would obviously take up the proteins that were abstracted and absorb it. There would be a reaction that occurs in the body that produces a primary response. From there, the body does fight a little bit of that protein, that initial reaction, so it develops that familiarity.
So should the real virus come around, or should we encounter the infection, your body defenses are already up to be able to handle and fight that infection.
This idea has existed since the late 1700s. The first vaccination occurred in 1796, the same year George Washington issued his farewell address. Edward Jenner used cowpox, a strain very similar to the deadly smallpox, to inoculate his family by presenting them with a weak form of the cowpox, then exposing them to the much more virulent smallpox. His family did not get the disease as their bodies had produced defenses that were similar enough to also stop smallpox. Studies like this have been repeated many times, and the theory has continuously been verified. However, in the past few years, a movement has been growing that opposes vaccines due to its supposed harmful effects and links to autism. With it has come heated debates and questions over the right of the parent versus the needs of the society. So what is this argument, and is it based in testable evidence? Or is there a deeper issue that needs to be diagnosed? This is the controversy of vaccinations. Since the inception of vaccines, the controversy concerning their negative effects has festered in many circles.
Edward Jenner was basically ostracized from his community. People thought it was disgusting that he would inject his family with pathogens from a sick animal.
Although medical professionals continue to stand by their claim that the benefits vaccines have for the health and safety of society greatly outweigh the possible risk associated with them, as with any medical procedure, the popularity of vaccines in the public eye has waned.
They're afraid of the possible side effects of receiving the vaccination, and therefore we're willing to accept what may occur if we do not get the vaccination.
The most recent controversy surrounding vaccines has been generated most significantly by Jenny McCarthy.
Evan was diagnosed with autism in 2005. Without a doubt in my mind, I believe vaccinations triggered Evan's autism.
We do not need that many vaccines.
They need to wake up and stop hurting our kids.
This has led to a rise in the number of parents who are calling for their right to choose which vaccines their child receive.
People still believe that there's a link. Nearly half of the country still thinks that vaccines and autism do have some sort of link.
Other anti-vaxxers today who aren't only worried about autism. There are the delayers like Rand Paul.
We sometimes give 5 and 6 vaccines all at one time. I chose to have mine delayed.
There are deniers of all stripes. They're the Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn. They're the parents of children with medical conditions who have to opt out.
How many ingredients have they studied of 35? What's the answer? It's 1. You've looked at 2 of 36 shots and 1 of 35 vaccines, and you're going to stand on the stage and say that vaccines and autism are unrelated? It is the most bogus tobacco science. It's a smokescreen, and anybody who takes the time to read it would agree. I'm so sick of doctors who don't read the studies, who don't know the details, sitting here telling parents and reassuring them that vaccines don't cause autism.
While many in opposition to McCarthy responded with level-headed, research-based comments.
What she's advocating is a return to vaccines that don't have preservatives in them, that both keep them safe and also make sure that those vaccines aren't contaminated in any way. So she's proposing something that isn't a realistic option.
So instead of making yet another statement about how yes, vaccines are good and no, they don't cause autism, let's use science to understand why fewer and fewer people are getting their children vaccinated.
Most people who don't vaccinate only want the best for their children, which is honourable. Let's not play the blame game though. Let's work together and eradicate this virus. Together, we can get rid of these dreadful monsters and consign them to their rightful place, the history book.
Some have lashed out in frustration.
Your stance, and all you did was attack me. As an individual, why would I want to listen to you when you do that to me?
And others have funneled their exasperation into comedic responses.
We found that 100% of respondents preferred the lollipop to the vaccination shot.
I had to go to school for 8 years.
I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about.
But you people still won't listen.
Now I have to use my only day off to talk to you idiots about vaccines?
But here at Kind Hearts Daycare, we've created a safe environment for all children, vaccinated and unvaccinated.
Here in LA, there are schools in which 20% of the students aren't vaccinated. Parents here are more scared of gluten than they are of smallpox.
Needless to say, this controversy has boiled over into blatant inaccurate accusations and pointed responses. But why are McCarthy's claims gaining ground? At first glance, these ideas might seem preposterous. However, we still need to ask, does she have a point? Are we actually contemplating the possible effects of vaccines or just blindly listening to the medical community? Let us look at this issue from an evidence-based and logical lens. First, McCarthy's demands to have parents choose which vaccines their children receive. With fewer and fewer parents choosing to give many vaccines to their children, others are actually being placed in a more dangerous circumstance because of a concept called herd immunity.
Say, for example, if you have a child who's immunocompromised, let's just say that there's a kid with, who's undergoing treatment for cancer and is immunocompromised. If you can have a child receive a flu vaccine or have the family be immunized, at least we know for sure that around him everybody else is immunized and this child will not be sick.
Some vaccinations also are not just to protect you, but to protect the public. It's not just down to you anymore. It definitely is to protect those that are around you.
Some people cannot get vaccinations, either because they're too young, because of chemotherapy or HIV, or because they're allergic to the vaccine. They need the rest of us to stop the disease for them.
An unimmunized person travels to a place where one of these diseases is circulating and then returns to a community with other similarly unimmunized people. And boom.
Boom indeed.
An outbreak somehow traced to visitors to Disneyland of all places
What started at the Orange County theme parks has spread to Colorado, Washington, Utah, and now Mexico. In 2014, the number tripled to 644 measles cases reported in 27 states. The spike blamed partly on parents who refused to vaccinate their children.
So the choice of not vaccinating is not just a choice that only affects the individual child. It affects the health of the society as a whole. McCarthy's call of not vaccinating is not an issue of parental choice, but a conflict of making a decision that will hurt others. Second, and most controversial, the correlation of an increase in vaccinations and the increase in autism.
Now, when we talk about autism, we're really referring to a range of developmental disorders which can affect a person's ability to communicate or socialize, or cause them to develop patterns of behavior that become pretty specific and inflexible.
Parent after parent says, I vaccinated my baby, they got a fever, and then they stopped speaking and then became autistic.
Although there is correlation, that does not signify causation. The growth is due to a wider range of diagnoses for autism.
Autism diagnoses are definitely on the rise. Now, many scientists believe that this is largely or even completely because of more effective diagnosis. We simply don't know precisely what causes autism. And in the absence of explanations, people try to make sense of it themselves, and the way our brains do that is almost entirely with cognitive bias. A cognitive bias is really just anything that skews how we process and interpret new information.
The only study conducted that reported a causation of vaccines in autism was conducted by Andrew Wakefield in 1998, and the study only involved one vaccine, MMR.
The anti-vaccine movement, popularized by those celebrities, grew out of a 1998 study in the Lancet Medical Journal.
Brian Deere has published evidence that you, and I quote, altered numerous facts about patients' medical histories to support your claim.
The study was later pulled from The Lancet, the journal it was published in, for an inability of others to replicate his findings and having a conflict of interest as he stood to gain financially from the findings. 99.9% of all other studies on this topic have shown no causation or even correlation between the MMR vaccine and autism. The major reason many see this correlation is that many early vaccines are administered right around the same period that symptoms of autism began to appear. So it is not the vaccines that are causing autism, but wider ranges of methods to diagnose the disease and the coinciding time of vaccinations and the appearance of symptoms has caused this correlation. So why then do parents choose not to vaccinate their children?
3 days later, I start to feel like very weak and start to sick day by day. And I think I spent kind of a couple of months to heal because no matter the doctor give me the what kind of other antibiotics to try to treat me well, but I never get it well.
This is Anita Lee. She decided to only give her children the vaccines that schools require after receiving a vaccine and getting very sick.
So I asked nurse if I can have the vaccine today because this is gonna be the 10 days. It's almost the last days. If I use the antibiotics and my vaccine together, and that nurse said yes. I don't think it's a problem.
When Miss Lee was given the vaccine, her immune system was likely compromised after just ending a dose of antibiotics, so it was unable to deal with the virus, even in its weakened form.
Having her body having to fight that specific vaccine, the medication that was involved, added to the workload and further suppressed her and made her sick. Depending on what the illness actually was, it may or may not have been related to the actual vaccination itself.
Although they may be licensed, medical professionals aren't perfect, and even the tiniest flaw could lead to a patient's mistrust. In McCarthy's case, she came to the conclusion that vaccines cause autism because of her son Evan. When he developed autism in the early stages of childhood, McCarthy blamed it on the fact that he was vaccinated. Her belief stemmed out of mother's frustration with doctors who couldn't answer why he wasn't perfect anymore. For Miss Lee, she doesn't believe vaccines cause autism, yet she doubts doctors because of that one bad encounter. Both created opinions about an extremely important choice in life without a proper education of the consequences.
I'm a big fan of the vaccines because I also trained in India, and we would see some of these illnesses that we don't see here. I have seen a child die from diphtheria. I have seen a child that had polio, and we see several actually that was paralyzed because of polio. Remember, these are all irreversible health issues. Once paralyzed, you can't get that child have his leg and walk again. but it can be prevented with a vaccine. So I do absolutely advocate vaccines.
Trained in a country without many of the medical luxuries we have in America, Dr. Murthy understands why vaccines are better than the alternative.
Vaccinations do cause side effects, and we know that. But depending on the patient's state of health, you weigh out the cost versus the benefit. And if the benefit outweighs the cost, then if they're okay with it, you give it.
We as citizens of a developed country at this time only understand the cost of vaccines with their mild side effects, and we no longer grasp what the benefits are.
Several years ago, a lot of people were vaccinated. You don't see the fear anymore. You haven't seen a single child, with day-to-day practice, or the population doesn't see anyone suffering from polio or paralyzed from polio. So over a period of time, I think people have started to fear the vaccine more than the illness itself. And that is the other reason why you don't have the fear, because you haven't seen it. So now, having heard the rest of it, they started to fear the vaccines.
These deadly diseases only exist as the fragmented memories of the epidemics of the past. Do you know what polio does?
Polio. It did once upon a time, not anymore.
Said they'll have a basic knowledge of disease process and infection control, flu, things like that, STDs, but not much about vaccines and things like that.
I don't remember what measles does, but I'm pretty sure it's really bad.
It's the same thing with any kind of health issue. You have to be informed so that you can make informed decisions about what you do.
So it seems like the solution is education at an early age.
You have to start a little earlier than when you become a parent, because once you are a parent, like I said, if I have a mom that has a 2-month-old baby, and she's clearly basing, or let's say a 1-year-old child, and she's clearly relating to the baby's health, or is making a comparison between her baby and the baby in the family that has autism, she can link it. So there's a bias to her outlook. It's her welfare of her child. Whereas if you're teaching that same information to a child who is a young adult or still in school, you're receiving the information in a very unbiased way. You're learning about it in a very objective way. You're not linking it, okay, so I learned about the illness, I learned about the vaccines, I know how the vaccine is going to prevent my illness. And yes, as you grow up and you become a parent one day, it's a lot easier for you to be able to make the decision making is a lot easier.
The public needs to be as educated as the provider is willing to allow. So the provider is giving them opportunities to ask questions. I didn't learn about these diseases in specifics, even in my undergraduate career. I had to go and dive a little bit deeper when I pursued higher training. Even with the conditions the way that they are, they're not obvious.
By having a deeper understanding of how things truly work and expanding our perspective on a variety of topics, we become more informed decision makers. These are the people who are making logical arguments and proper decisions based on truth, no matter which side they take. They are the solution to the epidemic of misinformation. As high school students in a learning environment that is safe and has a plethora of resources, we do have a collective obligation to make ourselves informed. Whether it's politics, religion, or science, we must all undertake the task of expanding our worldviews so that when we are approached with the difficult questions, we may make an informed decision based on sound logic. Because, in the moment, it will only hurt a bit.